Representative Dr. John Bizon is back with us. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Richard. It's great to be back with you again.
Thank you for coming today. Boy, a number of things that continue to make news, and we're going to try to get to several of them. One of them is this whole situation with the Detroit Public Schools, which you don't have to be in Detroit or from there to be affected by it. Isn't that true?
That is true. You know, we are pushing through, I shouldn't say we, because I've been against the package, as you know. I think that our children deserve better than the very worst school district in America. And when you have something that doesn't work, we ought to be closing it rather than perpetuating it. We should not be condemning our children to going to the very worst school in America, school system in America, even though they have some great schools in that district. You know, it's not every school that's a terrible school. It's just that they have failed time and time again. And what we have done in other communities, what we have done in Buena Vista, what we have done in Inkster, is when they get to the point where they have failed so badly, we close the district and we divide up the schools among the surrounding districts. And surrounding Detroit, we have approximately 18 districts, of which half of those districts are high performing, or 11 out of those 18 are high-performing districts. And the question in my mind is, why aren't we utilizing that when that is the model that has been established? What does that say for our citizens in Albion, where they weren't offered the option of, hey, we'll come in, we'll take care of all your debt, we'll get you lots of dollars to transition over to a new system there within the city. And I feel it is simply unwarranted. You know, I cannot do that to the children of Detroit. I cannot set the bad precedents that I think this sets. And if nothing else, this is bad policy.
Well, let's talk about that, because do you suppose there's some point at which you say, okay, this district, in spite of the fact that it's in poor shape, and by some accounts at least, this is a big inner city district, and how can you just shut that down? Is that the thought behind that on the other side of it?
I think that a lot of the people there feel that this is too big of an elephant to be able to tackle. We have 47,000 students that are remaining in that district. However, if you divide those $47,000 into usable bites, if you have 11 districts that are high-performing districts on the periphery of the city, that would be about 4,000 students apiece. And, you know, they have $200 million that they're going to be using for startup costs. You could use that for transition costs instead, and you'd have incentive of some $18 to $20 million to arrange for the transfer of 4,000 students. We would have 11 different systems that are high-performing districts that would mean an immediate increase for the pay of teachers, because the suburban teachers get paid better than the Detroit City teachers, and they would be paid under the new rules. We wouldn't have to worry about the retirement payments that Detroit hasn't been paying, and everyone around them is paying into the teachers' retirement system. And you'd have transition costs. If you take a look at the dollars that these bring in funding, you have 4,000 students that are bringing $7,000 apiece, something like $27 million in additional dollars to administrate these schools. And, you know, you may worry about the teachers, and we have some very good teachers in Detroit. They have given a lot, and yet I see this as a chance for them to increase their pay, a chance to have them continue to be in demand, and it encourages competition among the 11, where 3, 4, 5 years later, we would be able to go back and say, okay, these 11 districts may be doing this all very, very differently. Some may leave the students in place. Some may build new schools. Some may bring them back to their districts, especially if they are close.
Well, you anticipated my next question. Does this plan, then, this concept involve maintaining the buildings in Detroit or moving those students to buildings in the districts to which you refer that are neighboring?
I would defer to the judgment of those school boards. You know, that's not for me to say. These are people who know education. These are people who have been successful in education. These are people who have demonstrated a track record of being able to educate children. And so I would very much defer to people with that sort of expertise to say, wow, we ought to close this school, or no, we need to maintain good local schools for the kids in their own neighborhoods. And I would hope that there would be more of that.
Representative Dr. John Bizon here. We'll talk about this and other issues coming up. WBCK, Dr. John Bizon, representative from Battle Creek, is here. We've been talking about Detroit Public Schools. Is there any interest in the idea that you propose in Lansing right now about the Detroit schools?
Well, yesterday I was on the phone with the CFO of Wayne Risa, which is the Regional Education Administration, and I asked them about their contingency plans, and I was told that it wasn't on their radar as of yet. So I asked them to, at least we had the discussion, because if the school superintendent of schools and the treasurer were to say that the Detroit system was insolvent as is, then the tradition that we have is that it would go to that superintendent of the district to say, well, this is the way we're going to take care of it. This is the way we're going to ask to divvy up the schools. And thus far, that hasn't happened. But you know, coming from a military background, I would think that we'd have contingency plans. We know exactly what we're going to do if there's a rocket coming out of Korea, out of Iran, out of something that ISIS may capture, and yet we don't deal with our domestic problems in quite the same way, apparently. And the other one that I've been talking to is John Walsh from the governor's office, kind of his right-hand man on strategy. And he was in my office, I want to say last week, and we had talked about the idea, and he seemed to take it as a serious proposal. I've taken it to my leadership, saying that I really cannot be with them on this Detroit plan that they are configuring, because it condemns our students into that very worst school system in America, and I just can't go there.
Well, and you know, the notion that there's been mismanagement in the district and in the city, for that matter, for a long time, doesn't help the cause. And then you start talking about emergency managers, and that reputation is a little soiled at the moment, given the Flint situation. This idea could gain steam, don't you think?
Well, it might. I don't know. You know, we'd need to have some people in high places say that this is good policy. I think it would be good policy. I think that it would be good precedent, rather than it puts the responsibility on the districts to maintain a good administration and a good school and maintain a good reputation. And if we just jump in there and say, hey, it doesn't matter, we're going to bail you out, just to me, just doesn't send the right message.
Speaking of the governor's office and Flint and all of that, the governor testified last week in Washington about the Flint thing. It was a difficult thing to watch. And what bothered me a little bit about it is that a lot of it a fair amount, seemed to be partisan. And so, you know, the Democrats were attacking the governor, the Republicans were attacking the EPA head, and I don't know if that was productive. What did you think of it?
Well, I think that it has been a catastrophic failure at all layers of government. I don't know that anyone from the city, from the county, from the state, or from the federal government is walking away with clean hands. And you know, we need to make sure that we keep track of our elected officials, including myself. If you have strong feelings on any bill, I keep telling people, make sure that they let me know, and also watch what every legislator does, both on the D side and the R side. Be familiar with them, because When I am up there in Lansing, there are significant pressures from all of the lobbyists who have very special interests, and sometimes they come in with some what you think would be good ideas, but it's going to be very, very helpful for whoever is paying them, and we need to make sure that it's the people of the state of Michigan that we are serving.
Some folks say the governor should resign out of this thing. Do you have a thought on that? Is that a fair statement?
I'm under the impression that if the president took the responsibility that the governor has taken for Flint with his failure through the EPA, we would not be hearing those cries. And I get back to our conversation. We had talked about this in the past with Perry Hart right here.
Right.
And who is responsible? And Perry makes no bones that in Battle Creek, he is responsible for the water. This is good water. It's not the mayor's water. It's not the DEQ's water. It's not the governor's water. It's his water. And I love him for saying that. I think he is so right. And he says, I don't know what went on in Flint. I can't touch that. But he takes responsibility for the water, and it seems like that is missing when we go to the DEQ saying, nope, we're not at fault. The EPA says, nope, we were just looking from afar. And no, but the governor stepped in and he said, we're going to put significant dollars towards this. We're going to resolve this. We're going to make sure that this is better. And I think he's doing a very good job of that. And to remove him and take him out of that mode where he's fixing things in Flint, making it better, I think would be a mistake.
I've got to take a weather break, but are we making it better now, or have we turned it around such that the people in Flint are getting what they need?
They are getting significantly lower levels. I think we're up to about 93% of the tests coming back as being safe levels, and according to the old EPA standard, that would be enough to call the system good. But the governor is saying, no, I want better than this. I want every faucet to be good. And so we're continuing to work, even though by the old rules, we would have said a couple of months ago that, okay, we can go back to the water.
I asked Dave Maturin this when he was here. Should the state just replace all that infrastructure and pay for it?
This is a difficult question, given the fact that those pipes aren't just in Flint. They're all through the state of Michigan. And the problem with lead is not in the water, except in Flint. The problem with lead is on the walls, on the paint, that we have much, much higher levels of lead in our children throughout this state. And I would consider this to be a statewide crisis rather than just a Flint crisis. We are all sharing in lead problems throughout the state.
Dr. John Bizon is here. We'll continue in just a minute. WBCK, a few more minutes here with Representative Dr. John Bizon. We've been talking about the issue of the Flint situation, emergency managers, so on. There's been a little bit of tarnish, okay, maybe a lot, on the emergency manager thing, but we were just discussing this off the air, and you made an interesting point about that.
We find that we don't want to do emergency managers from a statewide system.
Sure.
When you have an emergency manager sent in by either Engler or Granholm or Snyder, by any of our governors, they are always trying to bail out a situation that is well out of hand already. And if you take a look at Detroit, I'm not sure that Detroit would be in the very good situation it is right now without an emergency manager kind of ushering them through that bankruptcy that they went through. I don't think that Muskegon would be doing well. Ellen Park, Lincoln Park, and there's probably another 4 or 5 that I'm missing. All have had
something like that,
emergency managers, and they have now functional cities where the citizens are back in control. And this is something that we do not take lightly, and we don't do it other than to save that community from going through bankruptcy and ending up with a situation that is far worse than where they started from. Because once you get into the judicial system, there is no telling what's going to happen to one's taxes. There's just no telling what's going to happen to all the creditors that are knocking on that door.
One of the other things that we discovered, or at least got some light shined on it with respect to this Flint thing, is the Freedom of Information Act limitations doesn't include the governor's office when it comes to Freedom of Information Act requests. You introduced legislation that would change that. Where is that now?
That went to a committee that had put together several different options, and it's been re-rolled and been given a new number. But just within the past 2 weeks, we have rolled out a series of 10 new Freedom of Information Act bills that will be going to a committee for serious consideration. It has bilateral support, and I am eagerly waiting committee testimony. After it gets through committee, presuming that it does, then it'll go to the whole House, and I will be able to support it even more forcefully on the House floor. And it's always great having transparency in government. I think that's one of the things that we need to have. I think that it's important as citizens that you have that transparency so that you know what's going on in Lansing and in Washington. But obviously these bills won't affect Washington.
Right. Before we go, I promised a conversation on plastic bags. I guess the Senate has a bill introduced that sounds like it's mostly centered on the east side of the state, but it would ban plastic bags in Michigan. Some other states have done that. I think California's done it. They're just so darn convenient. But they can clutter up a landfill, I suppose. Do you have any thoughts on that when it finally makes its way to you?
We're going to be looking at it, and I'm going to be studying the issue. And thus far, it hadn't even reached my radar until you had mentioned it walking into the studio today. And obviously, it's going to need a little bit of study. With most everything that we do out there, there are good things and bad things with each of the bills, and you have to weigh the good against the bad, because I haven't seen much, if anything, that goes through there that doesn't have some drawbacks to it. It's that measuring of good versus bad, who gets hurt, who gets helped.
We were just talking about recycling the other day. It just would be nice if we could just recycle those darn things, and then it might be easier, but we haven't figured out that technology yet.
Well, I'm counting on our youngsters coming through school to figure that out for us and help deliver us from the mounds of trash that we are getting. But you're right. We are a consumer society, and we're going to need to do better going into the future to protect our resources.
Representative Dr. John Bizon, thank you again.
Thank you, Richard.
We'll see you again soon.